The thinking substance, the true source of wealth. Introduction. Money is not the origin of wealth. It is the final, visible residue of something far more fundamental. Behind every financial result, whether growth, stagnation, or loss, there operates an invisible but exact principle. A substance that precedes form. A field that responds before events appear. This substance does not negotiate. It does not reward effort. And it does not recognize struggle as merit. It responds to thought, not casual thinking, not hopeful thinking, but dominant, organized, and persistent thought held with emotional coherence and without contradiction. More than a century ago, this principle was articulated with unusual clarity by Wallace D. Wattles, a philosopher and social thinker best known for his work, The Science of Getting Rich. Wattles was not a motivational speaker nor a financial guru. He was concerned with law, specifically the unseen laws that govern how form, opportunity, and wealth emerge from thought. He argued that all material things arise from a thinking substance, and that economic results are not accidents of effort or circumstance, but expressions of alignment with this deeper creative order. Most people never encounter this idea because they are trained to look only at effects. They are taught to pursue income, opportunities, credentials, leverage, and timing, while remaining unaware of the source that produces all of them. As a result, they spend years exhausting themselves inside systems that never change their underlying results. They work harder, they learn more, they try again, and the pattern repeats. This audiobook is not here to inspire you, motivate you, or promise outcomes. It exists for one purpose only, to make visible the law that has always been operating in your life, whether you recognized it or not. Everything that appears in form begins in the formless. Every structure begins as an idea. Every financial condition is first a mental condition. Wealth does not begin in markets, employers, or strategies. It begins in alignment with a thinking substance that organizes circumstances to match the pattern impressed upon it. This is why some individuals seem to attract opportunity without force, while others remain trapped in effort regardless of intelligence or discipline. The difference is not luck, it is not background, it is not morality, it is alignment. Once this principle is understood, competition loses its grip. Fear weakens. Urgency dissolves, action becomes precise instead of frantic. You stop chasing money and begin cooperating with the source that produces it. The law presented here is neutral. It does not care who you are. It does not care what you believe. It does not change. You are already using it. The only question is whether you are doing so deliberately or unconsciously. Chapter 1. The Invisible Source Behind All Wealth. There is a fundamental mistake at the root of almost every financial struggle: the belief that wealth is created from the outside in. Most people assume money comes from work, opportunity, education, timing, or advantage. These are not sources, they are channels, they are effects already downstream from something more primary. Wallace D. Wattles was precise on this point. He stated plainly that there is a thinking substance from which all things are made, and that this substance moves according to the impressions placed upon it by thought. Wealth, in this framework, is not manufactured, it is organized. This immediately changes the entire conversation. If wealth were created by effort alone, the hardest workers would be the richest. They are not. If wealth were created by intelligence alone, the most educated would dominate all financial outcomes. They do not. If wealth were created by competition, someone's failure would be required for another's success, yet wealth expands without requiring loss. The error lies in mistaking the visible mechanism for the invisible cause. According to Wattles, all material forms, money included, originate in a formless substance that is intelligent, responsive, and creative. Substance is not symbolic, it is not poetic language, it is not belief-based, it is a functional reality that behaves lawfully. Thought is the activating force, not thought of as daydreaming, not thought as hope, but thought held with clarity, consistency, and direction. The thinking substance does not evaluate your moral worth. It does not ask whether you deserve wealth. It does not respond to effort, struggle, or sacrifice. It responds to a mental pattern. This is why two people can apply the same strategy and receive entirely different outcomes. One may struggle endlessly, the other moves forward with fewer obstacles, fewer delays, and greater cooperation from circumstances. The difference is not chance, it is alignment. Wattles emphasize that this substance is abundant and unlimited. There is no scarcity within it. Scarcity exists only in human perception. When people believe resources are limited, they compete. When they compete, they think defensively. When they think defensively, they impress limitation upon the substance. The result appears as restricted opportunity, resistance, and stagnation. This is not punishment. It is a reflection. The thinking substance simply gives back what is impressed upon it. This also explains why wealth cannot be sustained through force alone. Many acquire money temporarily through aggressive action, speculation, or manipulation. But without alignment, the structure collapses. The substance does not stabilize outcomes that contradict the underlying mental pattern. Sustainable wealth requires congruence. Wattles made a critical distinction between creative thinking and competitive thinking. Competitive thinking assumes that supply is limited and must be taken. Creative thinking assumes that supply is infinite and must be organized. One contracts the mind, the other expands it. The substance responds accordingly. When a person begins to think creatively, clearly, constructively, and without contradiction, they stop reacting to circumstances. They stop waiting for permission. They stop measuring their progress against others. Their attention shifts inward toward the pattern they are impressing upon reality. This is the true beginning of wealth. Not money in hand, but order in mind. Every fortune that endures begins as a mental structure before it becomes a financial one. Systems are built in thought before they are built in form. Opportunities appear only after alignment is established internally. Action becomes effective only after the mental blueprint is stable. This is why Wattles insisted that thinking in a certain way is more important than doing things in a certain way. Action matters, but action without alignment produces friction. Action with alignment produces flow. The thinking substance reorganizes circumstances to match the dominant mental image held consistently over time. It does not rush. It does not delay. It responds exactly. This law is already operating in your life. Your current financial condition is not random. It is not imposed from the outside. It is not the result of fate, background, or luck. It is the visible expression of an invisible pattern that has been active for years. Once this is understood, blame becomes irrelevant. So does hope. What remains is responsibility. To change the effect, the cause must change. To change the outcome, the pattern must change. To create wealth, alignment with the thinking substance must be established first. Everything that follows in this audiobook builds on this foundation. Nothing contradicts it. Nothing bypasses it. Wealth has a source, and it is not where most people are looking. Chapter 2. Why effort alone never creates wealth. Effort has never been the source of wealth. It has only ever been a vehicle. This distinction is ignored by most people, and the cost of that ignorance is measured in exhaustion. From an early age, individuals are conditioned to believe that more effort produces more results. When results fail to appear, they are taught to increase pressure. Work longer, push harder, sacrifice more. Wallace D. Wattles rejected this assumption entirely. He observed that effort applied without alignment does not create wealth, it creates friction. The thinking substance does not reward intensity, it responds to direction. A person can exert enormous energy while moving against the law. Just as a swimmer can exhaust themselves fighting a current they do not understand, the current does not resist them. It simply continues. Effort becomes productive only when it flows in harmony with the creative order of reality. Without that harmony, effort multiplies, fatigue without altering outcomes. This is why so many intelligent, disciplined, and industrious people remain financially stagnant despite years of honest work. Their effort is real, their alignment is not. Wattles made it clear that wealth does not come from doing many things, but from doing the right things in the right way. The right way is not moral. It is not social. It is structural. It means acting from a mental pattern that is already impressed upon the thinking substance. When action precedes alignment, it is blind. When alignment precedes action, it is efficient. This explains a phenomenon that frustrates nearly everyone at some point. Two people take similar actions, yet one advances with apparent ease, while the other encounters resistance at every step. The difference is not talent or timing. The difference is whether action is being used to force results or to express an already established internal order. Effort used as force assumes lack. Effort used as expression assumes supply. The thinking substance responds differently to each. Those who rely on effort alone believe that wealth must be extracted from a limited environment. They treat life as a contest. Every gain appears to require someone else's loss. This belief impresses competition, scarcity, and urgency upon the substance. The resulting experience feels exactly as expected: pressure, delay, instability. Wattles warned that competitive thinking is the most reliable way to remain poor, not because competition is immoral, but because it contradicts the nature of creative reality. Creation is expansive. It multiplies without depletion. When thought is rooted in rivalry, the mind becomes defensive, reactive, and fragmented. Fragmented thought cannot organize substance. Effort, in this state, becomes compulsive. Work increases, but leverage disappears. Motion replaces progress. Activity becomes its own justification. The individual feels busy but not effective, tired but not advancing. This is not accidental. The thinking substance responds only to coherent mental images held with persistence. Scattered effort reflects scattered thought. When a person's inner world lacks order, their outer actions mirror that disorder precisely. Wattles did not argue against action. He argued against misdirected action. He emphasized that the proper role of effort is to carry out what has already been decided internally. Action should follow clarity, not attempt to create it. When people act in order to feel secure, effort becomes desperate. When they act from certainty, effort becomes exact. This is why forced hustle fails over time. It is not sustainable because it is not supported by the law that produces continuity. Temporary gains may occur, but they cannot stabilize. The substance does not reinforce structures built on contradiction. Sustainable wealth requires internal order first. Once the mental pattern is clear, effort decreases, not because work disappears, but because resistance does. The same actions suddenly produce disproportionate results. Timing improves. Cooperation appears. Opportunities align without being chased. This is not luck. It is congruent. Effort alone can build movement. Only alignment builds momentum. Until this distinction is understood, people will continue to worship hard work while quietly resenting its failure to deliver what was promised. They will exhaust themselves trying to earn outcomes that must first be permitted by law. Wattles was unequivocal. Thinking must precede doing. When this order is reversed, wealth becomes an accident. When it is respected, wealth becomes a process. Effort is not eliminated, it is subordinated, and only then does it begin to work. Chapter 3. The Law of Creative Thought. Effort fails when it attempts to replace the law. Alignment succeeds because it cooperates with it. Wallace D. Wattles identified the governing principle behind all creation as the law of creative thought. This law is not abstract, it is not symbolic, it is functional. It explains why thought is not merely a private experience but an organizing force that shapes form, circumstance, and outcome. The thinking substance does not create randomly, it creates according to a pattern. Thought supplies that pattern. Every material result begins as a mental image impressed upon the formless. This image does not need emotional excitement or belief rituals to activate it. It requires clarity, consistency, and persistence. When thought is stable, the substance responds by arranging conditions that express it. This process is constant and impartial. The law does not ask whether the thought is positive or negative. It asks only whether the thought is dominant. Repeated mental impressions, especially those charged with emotion, become instructions. The substance accepts them without resistance and translates them into experience. This is why people recreate the same financial conditions across different jobs, industries, and environments. They change circumstances while preserving the same internal pattern. The law responds faithfully. Wattles emphasized that creative thought must be held without contradiction. Contradiction weakens the image, doubt fractures the pattern, anxiety introduces interference. When thought fluctuates, results become unstable or delayed, not because the law hesitates, but because the instruction is unclear. Creative thought requires internal order. This is not about intensity, it is about coherence. A calm, well-defined idea held persistently has more power than an emotional desire scattered by fear and impatience. The substance responds more readily to certainty than to excitement. Certainty does not rush. Wattles noted that most people think about wealth while emotionally identifying with lack. Their thoughts conflict. One part of the mind imagines expansion, another rehearses limitation. The stronger pattern dominates, the substance follows it. This explains why affirmations fail when they contradict internal conviction. Words alone do nothing. Thought combined with expectation does everything. The law of creative thought operates through impression and expression. Thought impresses the substance expresses the form. Time is required not because the law is slow, but because reorganization must occur. Circumstances must shift, channels must open, structures must realign. Impatience interrupts this process. When people abandon a thought because results are not immediate, they erase the impression before it stabilizes. The law responds by returning them to familiar conditions. Nothing has gone wrong. The instruction was simply withdrawn. Persistence is not stubbornness, it is continuity. Wattles warned against emotional oscillation. Hope followed by doubt weakens creative force. Faith followed by fear cancels it. The substance responds to the strongest, most consistent signal, not the most optimistic one. This is why creative thought must be disciplined. Discipline does not mean tension, it means mental fidelity. Once a pattern is chosen, it is maintained without negotiation. The mind does not revisit the question. It proceeds as though the outcome is settled, because at the level of law, it is. This internal settlement is what allows action to become effective. When thought is fixed, action becomes obvious. Decisions clarify. Opportunities are recognized rather than chased. Movement feels natural instead of forced. The law of creative thought does not remove effort, it removes resistance. Wattles understood that thinking is the primary act of creation and that action is secondary. Action expresses what thinking has already established. When this order is reversed, people act endlessly without direction. When it is respected, action becomes surgical. The thinking substance cannot be deceived. It does not respond to words, rituals, or emotional displays. It responds to mental structure, whatever is held as true, consistently, calmly, and without internal argument, becomes the organizing center around which circumstances arrange themselves. This is not philosophy, it is a mechanism. Every chapter that follows builds upon this law. Without it, effort remains blind. With it, effort becomes precise. Wealth stops being accidental and begins to operate as a predictable outcome of alignment. Thought is the cause, form is the effect, and the law never reverses this order. Chapter 4. Why most people think but do not create. Thinking is not creative by default. Most thought produces nothing. This distinction explains why nearly everyone thinks, yet so few consistently create. The failure is not a lack of intelligence, nor a lack of desire. It is the absence of ordered thought. Wallace D. Wattles made this point implicitly. Thought only becomes creative when it is definite, unified, and undivided. The thinking substance does not respond to mental noise. It responds to clear instructions. Most people never give it one. Their minds are fragmented. Desire pulls in one direction, fear in another. They imagine expansion while emotionally rehearsing limitation. They want wealth while identifying with scarcity. These contradictions cancel the creative impulse before it reaches form. The substance does not refuse them. It receives mixed instructions. The result appears as delay, instability, or repetition of old conditions. Wattles understood that vague thinking produces vague outcomes. When a person does not know what they want, cannot define it, or repeatedly changes their mental picture, the substance has nothing stable to organize. Creation requires a fixed center. Most people never establish one. They confuse wishing with thinking. Wishing is emotional, thinking is structural. Wishing seeks relief, thinking establishes order. The law responds only to the latter. This is why daydreams collapse under pressure. They have no internal support. The moment resistance appears, the image dissolves. The thinking substance does not stabilize what the mind itself cannot hold. Another common failure is mental contradiction through comparison. People constantly measure their progress against others. They observe competitors, peers, and authorities, allowing external conditions to rewrite their internal image. This fractures focus. Wattles warned that comparison is a form of competitive thinking, and competitive thinking disrupts creation. It introduces doubt, envy, urgency, and imitation. The mind stops generating and starts reacting. Reactive thought does not create, it adjusts. Adjustment maintains the current order. Creation establishes a new one. Most people unknowingly choose adjustment. They adjust expectations downward. They adjust effort upward. They adjust desires to fit perceived limits. Each adjustment reinforces the same pattern. The substance complies faithfully. Another reason thought fails to create is the lack of persistence. Not persistence in action, but persistence in mental fidelity. People abandon ideas prematurely, not because they are wrong, but because they are not immediately confirmed. Wattles emphasized that time is required for reorganization. Thought sets change in motion, but the substance must rearrange conditions, relationships, and pathways. Impatience interrupts this process. Doubt withdraws the instruction. The substance returns to the last stable pattern. Nothing is lost. Nothing is punished. The law simply resets. Most people interpret this reset as failure. It is not. It is feedback. There is also the problem of emotional incoherence. Thought may be clear intellectually, while emotion contradicts it entirely. Fear, resentment, guilt, or unworthiness distort the signal. The thinking substance does not separate thought from feeling. It receives the combined pattern. This is why forced positivity fails. Words may say one thing. Emotion says another. The stronger signal prevails. Wattles did not suggest emotional suppression. He implied emotional alignment. Thought must be accompanied by a quiet certainty, not tension. Anxiety signals uncertainty. Certainty stabilizes creation. Most people are never taught this. They are taught to think harder, not cleaner, to repeat affirmations, not establish order, to hope, not decide. As a result, their thinking remains passive, reactive, and unfocused. Passive thought does not instruct. Reactive thought does not organize. Unfocused thought does not persist. Creation requires all three. When thought becomes deliberate, clear, stable, and free of contradiction, the substance begins to respond, not dramatically, not instantly, but precisely. Small shifts occur, perception sharpens, decisions simplify, opportunities become visible. These changes are subtle at first, which is why many miss them. They expect spectacle. The law produces structure. Wattles understood that creation is quiet. It does not announce itself. It unfolds through alignment, not excitement. Most people think but do not create because they never establish mental authority over their own patterns. Their minds remain open to interruption. External conditions dictate internal states. Thought becomes reaction instead of direction. Until this reverses, nothing changes. To create, thinking must become sovereign, undivided, persistent, free from negotiation. Only then does the thinking substance receive a signal strong enough to express in form. Chapter 5. The difference between getting money and becoming wealthy. Getting money is not the same as becoming wealthy. Confusing the two is one of the most expensive errors a person can make. Money is a form. Wealth is a condition. Wallace D. Wattles understood this distinction clearly. He did not define wealth as possession, accumulation, or income. He defined it as the ability to continuously create. In this sense, money is only a temporary expression of an underlying capacity. When the capacity is absent, money dissipates. When the capacity is present, money reappears, even after loss. This is why some individuals recover from financial collapse while others never do. The difference is not resilience or luck. It is whether wealth exists as an internal order, not merely as an external result. Most people focus on acquisition. They want money in hand because it promises relief, security, freedom from pressure. But relief is temporary when the internal pattern remains unchanged. Without internal order, money becomes unstable. It is spent, lost, mismanaged, or undermined by the same thinking that created scarcity. Wattles emphasized that wealth must be grown, not seized. Growth implies continuity. Continuity requires alignment with the thinking substance. This alignment cannot be faked by income alone. Getting money is episodic. Becoming wealthy is systemic. Those who only get money live in cycles, peaks followed by a decline, gains followed by anxiety. They are never settled because their sense of stability depends on conditions they do not control. Their attention remains external, their thinking remains reactive. Wealthy individuals, regardless of current balance, operate differently. Their thinking is organized around production, not consumption. They do not ask how to extract value from the world. They ask how to create value that the world will inevitably exchange for money. This difference is subtle but decisive. Wattles rejected the idea that wealth is won through advantage. He argued that wealth is produced through usefulness expressed creatively. When a person aligns with the thinking substance and applies their effort constructively, they expand life for others. Money follows as a secondary effect. This is why lasting wealth is always connected to service, not as morality, but as a mechanism. Creation that benefits others multiplies demand without competition. The substance reinforces what expands life. Those who pursue money directly often feel pressured to compromise. They compete, they imitate, they rush. In doing so, they weaken their creative signal. The substance reflects this instability. Becoming wealthy requires a different orientation. The individual stops asking how to get more and starts asking how to become more organized internally. Their focus shifts from outcome to process, from relief to expression, from accumulation to expansion. This does not make them passive, it makes them precise. Wattles insisted that a wealthy person must maintain a wealthy mental image at all times, not as fantasy, but as settled expectation. This image is not about luxury or excess, it is about capacity. The capacity to create, to adapt, to produce value regardless of circumstance. When this image becomes dominant, fear weakens, urgency dissolves, decisions improve. The person no longer scrambles for opportunity. Opportunity reorganizes around them. This is the difference between chasing money and allowing money to appear as evidence of alignment. Those who get money often feel relieved when it arrives. Those who are wealthy feel confirmed. They expected it. They planned for it. It fits the internal structure already in place. This distinction also explains why sudden wealth destabilizes many. Without internal order, money amplifies disorder. It accelerates existing patterns rather than correcting them. The substance does not change the person to fit the money. It allows the money to express the person. Wattles never promised riches without responsibility. He implied that wealth is the natural result of assuming responsibility for one's internal state. Once this responsibility is accepted, money becomes manageable, reproducible, and secondary. To become wealthy is to become causal rather than reactive. It is to operate from the source rather than chase the effect. It is to think in terms of systems, not events. Money comes and goes. Wealth remains. Everything that follows in this audiobook moves deeper into this orientation. The goal is not to teach you how to acquire money, but to show you how to establish the internal conditions that make wealth unavoidable. Getting money is a moment. Becoming wealthy is a state, and only one of them endures. Chapter 6. The role of gratitude, faith, and expectation. Gratitude, faith, and expectation are not emotional accessories. They are functional states. Wallace D. Wattles did not treat these qualities as virtues. He treated them as mechanisms that keep thought aligned with the thinking substance. When they are absent, creation becomes unstable. When they are present, resistance dissolves. Gratitude is not appreciation for what has already occurred. It is recognition of supply before form. It signals to the mind that creation is already in motion. This stabilizes thought. A grateful mind does not oscillate. It does not doubt. It does not strain. Wattles emphasized gratitude because it fixes attention on abundance rather than lack. Attention is not neutral. Whatever the mind dwells upon becomes the dominant pattern impressed upon the substance. Gratitude keeps that pattern expansive. Without gratitude, thought contracts. A mind focused on deficiency continually impresses deficiency. This is not punishment, it is a reflection. The thinking substance reproduces the dominant internal atmosphere. Gratitude changes that atmosphere immediately, not by denial, but by orientation. Faith in this framework is not belief in outcomes. It is an assumption of law. It is the quiet acceptance that the substance responds as described without emotional negotiation. Faith removes internal argument. Wattles understood faith as a settled conviction, not excitement, not optimism. Conviction does not rush, it does not look for confirmation, it does not require reassurance. Faith holds the mental image steady. Most people weaken their creative thought through hesitation. They think, then reconsider, they decide, then doubt, they imagine, then retreat. This constant revision fractures the signal. The substance receives no stable instruction. Faith eliminates revision. Expectation completes the mechanism. Expectation is not waiting, it is mental readiness. It assumes that form will appear through appropriate channels at the appropriate time. It does not specify the path. It does not micromanage the process. Expectation keeps the mind open. Without expectation, thought becomes rigid. The individual attempts to control how wealth must appear. This constriction limits pathways. The substance works through expansion, not confinement. When expectation is present, opportunity is recognized rather than forced. These three states work together. Gratitude stabilizes attention. Faith fixes the pattern. Expectation allows expression. Remove anyone and the process weakens. Most people misunderstand these principles because they treat them emotionally. They attempt to feel grateful instead of thinking gratefully. They attempt to believe instead of assuming. They attempt to expect instead of remaining open. Wattles did not advocate emotional performance. He implied mental posture. A person can feel uncertain while still holding a clear pattern. Feelings fluctuate. Structure does not. The thinking substance responds to structure. This is why gratitude, faith, and expectation must be practiced deliberately, not as moods, but as orientations. They are maintained regardless of temporary conditions. Circumstances do not dictate them. They dictate circumstances. When these states are present, effort becomes aligned automatically. Action feels timed rather than rushed. Decisions simplify, resistance decreases. The individual no longer feels compelled to chase outcomes. This is not passivity, it is coordination. Wattles warned that impatience is the clearest sign of misalignment. Impatience reveals doubt. Doubt fractures faith. Fractured faith destabilizes creative thought. The substance responds by slowing expression, not to punish, but because the pattern is no longer clear. Patience is not waiting, it is non-interference. When gratitude, faith, and expectation are active, the mind remains ordered even while form is unfinished. This allows the substance to complete its work without interruption. This is why those who understand this law appear calm under pressure. Their confidence is not emotional, it is structural. They know that creation is already underway because the internal condition has been established. Wattles insisted that once the mental posture is correct, outcomes become inevitable, not instant, but certain. The substance does not forget an impression that is held consistently. It does not ignore a pattern that remains undisturbed. Gratitude keeps the mind aligned. Faith keeps the signal intact. Expectation keeps the pathway open. Together they form the internal environment in which wealth can emerge without force. Without them, even the best ideas collapse under their own contradiction. Chapter 7. Action that aligns with the thinking substance. Action is not optional, but most action is misapplied. Wallace D. Wattles was explicit. The thinking substance responds to thought, but thought must express itself through action. Creation is not completed in the mind alone. However, action does not initiate creation. It executes it. This distinction determines whether effort multiplies results or cancels them. Action taken without alignment attempts to force outcomes. It is driven by urgency, fear, or comparison. It seeks confirmation before the internal pattern is stable. This kind of action feels heavy. It requires constant motivation. It produces resistance. Aligned action feels different. When thought is clear, stable, and undivided, action becomes obvious. Decisions simplify. The next step presents itself without strain. Wattles referred to this as acting in the certain way. Not a frantic way, not a speculative way, a precise way. The thinking substance does not reward motion. It responds to coherent execution. Most people act too soon. They move before the mental image has settled. As a result, they change direction constantly. They abandon one path for another. They confuse activity with progress. The substance reflects this instability by producing inconsistent results. Aligned action requires patience before movement and decisiveness during movement. Wattles emphasized that the correct role of action is to express faith, not to compensate for doubt. When action is taken to make something happen, it signals insecurity. When action is taken because something is already happening, it signals alignment. The substance responds differently to each. This is why some actions feel timely and effective, while others feel exhausting and unproductive, even when they appear identical on the surface. The difference lies in the internal posture from which they are taken. Aligned action is calm. It does not rush. It does not hesitate. It moves forward without obsession over outcomes, because outcomes are already assumed. The individual acts not to get, but to give expression to an internal order. Wattles also warned against overaction. Excessive effort is often a sign of internal disorder. When thought is unclear, people compensate by doing more. They work longer hours, chase more opportunities, and consume more information. None of this stabilizes creation. The thinking substance responds to clarity, not volume. Aligned action is efficient. It tends to be smaller, more precise, and better timed. It often appears ordinary. There is nothing dramatic about it, yet it produces disproportionate results because it flows with the current rather than against it. Another critical element is present action. Wattles insisted that one must act in the present moment using the tools, opportunities, and conditions already available. Waiting for perfect circumstances signals doubt. Aligned action uses what is at hand without anxiety. This does not mean settling, it means cooperating. The thinking substance reorganizes future conditions, but it requires present participation. Action anchors thought in form. Without action, the impression remains incomplete. However, action must never contradict the internal pattern. Acting from fear while thinking of abundance creates interference. Acting from scarcity while affirming wealth fractures the signal. Consistency between thought and action is essential. This is why aligned action feels natural. It does not require self-coercion. It does not feel like a struggle. When struggle dominates, alignment is missing. Wattles understood that the correct sequence is always the same. First, establish the mental pattern. Then, act without tension. Then, allow the substance to organize results. Reversing this sequence produces chaos. Those who understand this law stop asking whether they are doing enough. They ask whether what they are doing is congruent. One aligned action carries more creative force than 1,000 frantic ones. Aligned action also reduces fear of mistakes. When action is taken as expression rather than a gamble, outcomes become feedback instead of verdicts. Adjustments are made without emotional collapse. Progress becomes iterative, not traumatic. This is how wealth grows quietly, not through heroic effort, not through constant hustle, but through sustained cooperation with the law. Action does not create wealth. It allows wealth to appear. And only when action remains subordinate to alignment does it begin to work. Chapter 8. Why competition? Thinking keeps you poor. Competition is not a strategy, it is a mental condition. Wallace D. Wattles identified competitive thinking as the primary psychological cause of poverty. Not because competition is unethical, but because it contradicts the structure of creation itself. Wealth does not emerge from conflict over limited resources. It emerges from the expansion of supply through creative intelligence. Competition assumes scarcity. Creation assumes abundance. The thinking substance responds to assumptions, not intentions. When the mind is organized around rivalry, it imposes limitation. The substance reflects that limitation through resistance, delay, and instability. This is not failure, it is correspondence. Most people are trained to compete from childhood. They compare grades, income, status, and recognition. Over time, this comparison becomes internalized. The mind measures itself constantly against others. Thought becomes reactive. Focus fractures. Fragmented thought cannot create. Wattles was explicit. Competitive thinking places attention on what others have rather than on what one is creating. This diverts creative energy outward. Instead of organizing substance, the mind monitors threats. The substance responds by maintaining defensive conditions. This is why competitive environments feel tense and exhausting. They demand vigilance. Vigilance consumes creative capacity. Creation requires inward authority. Those who compete believe they must secure an advantage before someone else does. This belief introduces urgency. Urgency accelerates action without clarity. Action taken in urgency often contradicts internal alignment. The substance reflects this contradiction by producing unstable outcomes. Even when competitive strategies succeed temporarily, they do not endure. Wealth gained through opposition lacks structural support. It must be defended constantly. The mind remains occupied with protection rather than expansion. Wattles understood that creation does not require someone else's loss. The thinking substance is unlimited. It does not distribute wealth by subtraction. It multiplies by the expression. When a person creates value, new supply enters the system. No one is deprived. Competition blinds people to this reality. When individuals focus on surpassing others, they imitate. Imitation replaces originality. The mental pattern weakens because it is borrowed rather than generated. The substance does not amplify imitation, it reflects it as mediocrity. This is why competitive markets often feel saturated. Everyone is doing the same thing in the same way for the same reasons. The substance produces diminishing returns because the instruction lacks uniqueness. Wattles advised against competing in form and urged creation in essence. Form can be copied, essence cannot. The thinking substance responds most strongly to original patterns, not replicas. Competitive thinking also produces fear of loss. Fear narrows perception. Narrow perception reduces available options. The substance reflects this narrowing by closing pathways. Opportunities that require openness remain invisible. This is not punishment, it is symmetry. Creative thinking, by contrast, is expansive. It does not watch others. It organizes internally. It assumes enough. It moves without haste. The substance responds by opening channels, not because it favors the individual, but because the mental instruction is clear and non-contradictory. Wattles emphasized that a creative mind does not compete, it coordinates. It looks for unmet needs, not rivals. It seeks usefulness, not dominance. Value creation replaces conquest. This shift is subtle but decisive. The moment a person stops measuring themselves against others, mental energy returns inward. Thought stabilizes. The creative image strengthens. The substance begins to respond. Those who escape competition often appear unconcerned with trends, rankings, or noise. Their calm is mistaken for indifference. It is not. It is a focus. Competition fragments attention. Creation concentrates it. Wattles insisted that to become wealthy, one must leave the competitive plane entirely. This does not mean ignoring the world. It means refusing to let external comparison dictate internal order. Once this refusal is established, effort changes. Action becomes deliberate rather than reactive. Growth becomes steady rather than volatile. Wealth stops being defended and starts being generated. Competition may produce motion. Only creation produces continuity. As long as the mind remains organized around rivalry, wealth will remain fragile. The thinking substance cannot stabilize what is built in opposition to its nature. To cooperate with the law, competition must be abandoned, not as a moral choice, but as a structural one. Wealth requires expansion. Expansion requires creation. Creation cannot occur in a mind at war. Chapter 9: Living in Harmony with the Source. Wealth becomes stable only when alignment becomes habitual. Understanding the thinking substance is not enough. Applying it occasionally is not enough. Harmony with the Source is not achieved through moments of insight, but through consistency of inner order. Wallace D. Wattles was clear on this point. Once a person understands the law, their responsibility is no longer discovery, but maintenance. The work shifts from seeking results to sustaining alignment. Wealth grows naturally in this state because resistance has been removed. Living in harmony with the Source means that thought, emotion, and action no longer contradict one another. The internal environment becomes coherent. The mind stops arguing with itself. The substance responds by stabilizing outcomes. This harmony is expressed first in thinking. Thought becomes deliberate. The individual no longer allows random impressions, external noise, or emotional reactions to dominate. Attention: ideas are chosen, images are held, mental habits are regulated, the mind stops drifting and starts governing. This governance is quieter, there is no force involved, only discipline. Speech follows thought. Words are no longer used to vent frustration or rehearse limitations. They are used sparingly and accurately. Wattles understood that speech reinforces mental patterns. Careless language weakens alignment. Deliberate language strengthens it. A person living in harmony does not constantly speak about lack, struggle, or delay. Not because these things do not exist, but because repeating them sustains them. Speech becomes functional. Attention follows next. What the mind dwells upon becomes dominant. A person aligned with the Source chooses their focus carefully. They do not obsess over news, comparison, or speculation. They study principles, they observe patterns, they direct attention inward toward clarity and execution. This selective attention is not avoidance, it is prioritization. Habit completes the structure. Wattles emphasized that wealth is not created in moments of enthusiasm, but through repeated alignment. Daily thinking patterns matter more than occasional insight. Small deviations sustained over time produce large distortions. Small corrections sustained over time produce wealth. Living in harmony with the Source also changes how difficulty is interpreted. Obstacles are no longer seen as signals of failure. They are seen as points of adjustment. The individual does not panic. They refine alignment. The substance responds accordingly. This removes emotional volatility. Those who live in harmony do not experience dramatic emotional swings tied to outcomes. Their stability does not come from results. It comes from knowing that results follow alignment inevitably. This knowledge creates calm. Calm increases clarity. Clarity improves action. Action reinforces alignment. The cycle stabilizes. Wattles did not describe wealth as accumulation. He described it as participation in a creative flow. When a person lives in harmony with that flow, wealth becomes the natural byproduct of correct orientation. Money arrives through ordinary channels. Work continues. Effort is applied. Nothing mystical occurs on the surface, yet beneath appearances resistance has been removed. The system begins to function as designed. This is why harmony feels simple. There is no strain in it, no urgency, no desperation. The person no longer tries to outpace life. They cooperate with it. The thinking substance reorganizes circumstances because nothing in the internal pattern obstructs it. This harmony does not isolate the individual from the world. It makes them effective within it. They become useful. They become precise. Their value increases naturally because it is no longer diluted by contradiction. Living in harmony with the source is not a temporary practice. It is a permanent orientation. Once established, it does not require constant effort. It requires vigilance, attention to alignment, but not struggle. Wattles understood that this state marks the true transition from effort to creation, from survival to expansion, from instability to continuity. Wealth stops being pursued. It starts responding. This is not the end of the process. It is the condition under which the process finally works. The source has always been available. The law has always been active. Harmony is the only requirement. Epilogue. Nothing you have heard changes tomorrow. Nothing begins later. The thinking substance does not activate because you listened to this audiobook. It was active long before you arrived here. It has been responding to your dominant patterns every day, quietly, precisely, without exception. This audiobook did not give you a new power. It clarified an existing one. From this point forward, the law will continue to operate exactly as it always has. The only difference is awareness. Whether you choose to align deliberately or continue unconsciously is not a moral decision. It is a structural one. Wealth does not ask to be believed in. It does not need motivation. It responds only to order. If the ideas you've just heard brought clarity rather than comfort, then this channel is for you. Audiolibros del Saber exists for one reason: to expose principles that work, even when they challenge what is familiar. If this audiobook sharpened your thinking, you may subscribe. If it changed how you see cause and effect, you may leave a like. Neither action alters the law, but both help these ideas reach those who are ready to hear them. The work now is not listening. It is alignment. We'll continue here in the next audiobook.